morning, Pontiac High School. Today, we are looking at our first of 3 lessons on the American Civil War. This one is titled Election and Secession. The 1850s were not an easy time in American history. A lot of political strife, a lot of division, tensions between North and South were growing and grew worse every single year. They had different opinions on tariffs that led to an economic depression, but they had some other issues as well. In 1859, a man by the name of John Brown, who was an abolitionist is somebody who believes that slavery should be outlawed. John Brown led a raid on an armory in the city of Harper's Ferry, Virginia. He planned to use the weapons gained from attacking this armory to arm slaves and support a slave revolt in Virginia. Now, at this time, Colonel Robert E. Lee, who would later become a famous Civil War general, led a force that trapped Brown in that armory. When Brown was later captured, he was hanged. Seeing this abolitionist hanged stirred a lot of Northern anger. Now, some Northerners had admired John Brown, thought that what he was doing was right and that he should be a hero. Now, most, however, believed that the law exists for a reason and should be followed, and that John Brown himself had gone a little too far, that he had crossed a line by attacking an armory and trying to lead a revolt. Southerners, in particular, were afraid that these Northerners that admired John Brown would try to repeat what he had done, and they were afraid of further attacks. So to defend against potential slave revolts, militias, these unofficial armies, formed throughout the South, and their plan was to defend at a moment's notice against future attacks. So already we have the South arming up and getting ready to defend itself. Now, the election of 1860 was an important turning point in this struggle. Slavery was a big issue. Tariffs, which are taxes on imported goods, were central issues in the 1860 election. The South supported slavery and were opposed to tariffs. The North supported tariffs because it would protect Northern goods, which were being produced in Northern factories. You see, the South did not have very many factories. Now, Republicans would select a man by the name of Abraham Lincoln as their candidate for president. That's this guy right here. Democrats selected Stephen Douglas. Now, Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln were both from Illinois. They had run against each other for the U.S. Senate just 2 years earlier. The party will split, however, the Democrats will, because of Douglas's position in the 1858 Senate campaign. That is, some Democrats support Douglas and his views on slavery in the South, whereas some do not. Let's look at the Republicans. Lincoln was a fan of the tariff. He wanted to protect Northern businesses, and he believed that this would end the economic depression in the United States. He also wanted to limit slavery to those states that currently allowed it. Now, this was his public position. He didn't believe that slavery should be allowed to spread, and any new state added to the Union should be a free state. He was not publicly speaking about abolishing slavery, although there is plenty of evidence to suggest that he privately believed that this should be the case. The South, however, was threatening to secede if Lincoln won the election. They were saying that if Lincoln becomes president, we don't want to have any part of his country. Now, the split in the Democratic Party allowed Abraham Lincoln to win this election, but it's important to note he only won 40% of the popular vote. More Americans did not want Lincoln to be president than did want Lincoln to be president. In second place, we had John Breckinridge, was a Southern Democrat. Southern Democrats were more supportive of slavery, and he finished second. Douglas finished a distant fourth, but his votes took enough away from Breckinridge to make sure that Lincoln would win. Now, South Carolina did an interesting thing in 1860. When Lincoln won the election, Lincoln was not their candidate. They did not like Abraham Lincoln. They wanted John C. Breckinridge. And when Lincoln won, well, they actually chose this as a moment to celebrate because they had decided to secede. Lincoln's election led to the birth of the new nation of South Carolina. Newspapers reported this election as the start of the Revolution of 1860. This was not always the case, however. This was not met with celebration throughout the South. Not all Southerners were excited to leave the Union. An example of this is Kentucky Senator John Crittenden. Crittenden tried to save the Union. He wanted to remain whole. He did not want to see the South secede. So he proposed a constitutional amendment. This amendment to the U.S. Constitution would forever guarantee the right to own slaves in the South. It would become permanent. The President of the United States, Congress, could not change the South's right to hold slaves. Breckinridge believed that this would ease the South's fear while keeping the Union whole. But Republicans rejected this. Lincoln hated the idea of a constitutional amendment, which would mean that Congress and the President could not change in the future if they wanted to. So the result was secession. In December of 1860, before Lincoln even became president, he'd been elected in November and wouldn't become president until the following year, South Carolina seceded from the U.S. And by February, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana, and Texas had joined them. Let's take a look at the map. Here we see the United States of America at the time. The brown are just territories, they're not states. And we'd be dividing up into our northern free states where slavery is not allowed. Here we have 4 states in purple that allow slaves but stayed with the Union. Here we have the deep southern states that seceded very early in this conflict, either before Lincoln became president or just after. And these 4 southern states, which will secede, but it will take them a little bit longer, the war will have already began by the time these 4 states leave the Union. And what that leaves us with are the Confederate States of America. In February, representatives from these states met in Alabama and formed their new nation, the Confederate States of America. And this man right here, Jefferson Davis, who was a former congressman, was elected president of this new nation. That is our lesson for today. We looked at the debate over John Brown, slavery, the election of 1860, and early secession in this lesson. I hope you enjoyed this and learned something, and I'll see you next time.